Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
All right, so welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to try to tackle the pretty complex situation in Ukraine. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the potential for peacekeepers, but we've got a lot of conflicting information in our sources. We've got statements from all the major players: Trump, Putin, Macron, Lavrov, and Zelensky. It's kind of a tangled web. Yeah. So we're here to try to make sense of it all.
Yeah, it is fascinating how these international relations can shift so rapidly, One moment you have talk of collaboration, and then the next we're facing denials and potential escalation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Keeps us on our toes. So let's start with Trump's claim that Putin is open to European peacekeepers in Ukraine. He said he directly asked Putin about it during his White House meeting with Macron. Now, on the surface, that sounds promising, right?
It would seem so, but the Kremlin was very quick to contradict that statement. They referenced a previous statement from Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who stated that such a deployment would be unacceptable.
So this is where things get really interesting. Lavrov's statement was actually made before the Trump-Macron meeting. So either Putin had like a major change of heart in a very short time frame, or someone isn't being entirely forthcoming.
Yeah, and this discrepancy really raises the question, what's the real motive behind these conflicting messages? Is it simply a misunderstanding? Is it a calculated attempt at misdirection? Or is it something else entirely? And more importantly, what does it reveal about the state of U.S.-Russia relations?
It's a real puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we can't ignore the increasing tension between the U.S. and Europe.
Wow.
While Trump and Putin seem to be, maybe finding common ground, the U.S. and its European allies are experiencing growing friction. I mean, Macron's visit was the first from a European leader since the start of Trump's second term, which is pretty symbolic, don't you think?
It really is. It seems like we might be witnessing a shift in global alliances. The U.S. and Russia, these traditional rivals, are showing signs of cooperation while the historically strong, U.S.-European partnership is showing some cracks. And of course, all of this is happening with the backdrop of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine.
Right. And there's this growing concern that Ukraine and its allies are being sidelined in these U.S.-Russia peace talks. Ultimately, it's their country at stake.
Right.
They're the ones living with the daily consequences of this conflict.
Yeah, and that's a really crucial point. It's easy to get caught up in all the high-level diplomacy and the power plays, but we can't forget about the human cost of this conflict. The people of Ukraine are at the heart of this issue, and their voices need to be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of voices, Macron seems to be walking kind of a tightrope here.
Yeah.
On one hand, he's maintaining a working relationship with Trump, but on the other hand, he's expressing caution about Putin and pushing back against some of Trump's claims. He even went so far as to correct Trump on who's provided more financial support to Ukraine, which seems like a small disagreement.
Yeah.
But it reveals a deeper tension, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests a potential shift in the balance of power within the Western alliance, with Europe asserting its own position on the world stage.
So Macron's position really highlights the intricate, web of relationships at play here. He's trying to advocate for European interests, but he's also trying to navigate the increasingly fragile transatlantic alliance. It's a delicate balancing act.
Well, sure.
So then there's the issue of Trump's comments regarding a final deal to access Ukraine's rare earth metals. He's essentially suggesting using those resources to recoup the aid that the U.S. has provided to Ukraine. And this comes right after Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, rejected a U.S. demand for, get this, $500 billion worth of these metals. So to clarify for our listener, rare earth metals are essential for manufacturing various high-tech products, from smartphones to military equipment. So they're pretty strategically valuable, which is why both the U.S. and Russia are kind of vying for control.
Exactly. And Trump's approach raises some interesting questions. Is it ethical to leverage aid in this way, especially considering the really dire circumstances in Ukraine? Is it fair to demand such a significant return on investment?
Yeah, good point. We have a quote here from a Ukrainian tank commander. His name's Valentin. He expressed initial gratitude for humanitarian aid, but now he finds Trump's current conditions unacceptable. He sees it as a shift from genuine support to a transactional relationship.
Yeah, I think Valentin's perspective is crucial here. It really reminds us that these decisions made in Washington and Moscow have real consequences for the people actually living through this conflict. It underscores that diplomacy isn't just about abstract agreements, it's about people's lives. And it really goes beyond just the financial aspect, doesn't it? It's about control and influence. Access to these rare earth metals is strategically important. Both the US and Russia are competing for that. And Ukraine's caught in the middle.
Yeah, it's like they're a pawn in this geopolitical chess match. Like that meeting between Lavrov and Rubio in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
They're discussing the peace process, but Ukraine isn't even there.
Exactly. And, the comment from the Russian representative that Kyiv would be invited in due time doesn't really help. It just reinforces the idea that decisions about Ukraine's future are being made by these external forces without their full participation.
But we have seen statements from Zelensky, haven't we, about the conflict and potential peace deals. So what's his take on all this?
Well, Zelensky has consistently called for a complete withdrawal of Russian forces. He wants to see Ukraine's territorial integrity restored. He's emphasized the importance of international support and has been really actively seeking those security guarantees for Ukraine. He basically sees any peace deal that compromises Ukraine's sovereignty as unacceptable.
So it sounds like while there are discussions happening, there's a fundamental disagreement on the core issues. Makes you wonder if there's any real commitment to finding a lasting peace in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then you've got the U.S. opposing a UN resolution put forth by Ukraine calling for Russia's withdrawal.
Which is pretty striking considering the U.S. then introduced its own resolution only to abstain from voting on it after European-led amendments were added. It kind of points to a fractured and inconsistent approach to international diplomacy.
It's like everyone's talking about peace, but no one can agree what that actually looks like or how to achieve it. And while this is all going on, the situation on the ground in Ukraine keeps escalating. We've seen air raid alerts across the entire country. Polish and Allied aircraft have been scrambling.
It's a reminder that while we're discussing, the ins and outs of diplomacy and political maneuvering, there are people on the ground facing a very real threat of violence. We can't lose sight of that.
These air raid alerts are pretty concerning. What do they tell us about how the conflict's evolving?
Well, it suggests that we might be seeing a shift in the conflict's dynamics. It started as primarily a ground war, but it looks like it might be evolving to incorporate more air combat. And this raises a whole new set of challenges and risks for Ukraine and the surrounding region.
Our tank commander, Valentin, mentioned that the war is shifting from ground operations to air battles. What does that mean for the future of the conflict?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? If the conflict does escalate further into the air, what will that mean? Not just for Ukraine, but for the region. Maybe even for the world.
There's a lot to process.
Yeah.
So much at stake. And the path forward is anything but clear. So where does this leave Ukraine? What can we expect to see happen next? Feels like we're just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Well, I think the important thing now is that we don't just sit back and watch. We need to understand what's really happening here. All these different viewpoints and the potential consequences. That's the first step. Then we can start thinking about how we can actually help bring about a peaceful resolution.
Yeah, it's tough, though. When you're dealing with a global crisis like this, it's easy to feel powerless. But I guess even just staying informed, having these conversations, and advocating for peace, it's got to count for something, right?
It absolutely does. We can't forget this isn't just some political game. There are real people whose lives are being affected, and the future of a whole nation is at stake. Every choice we make, every action we take can make a difference, no matter how small.
This deep dive has definitely left me with more questions than answers. But it's also made me want to stay engaged, learn more, and see if I can find some way to support those peace efforts.
Well, that's the thing about knowledge. It makes you think critically, challenge your assumptions, and look for solutions. Even when it seems like there are all these huge obstacles in the way, understanding is always the first step towards making things better.
So, to our listener, I'll leave you with this. Given all the competing interests, the rising tensions, and the lack of clarity on what peacekeeping might even look like, what do you think is going to happen in Ukraine? And what role can you play in supporting peace? Keep those questions in mind as you learn more about this really complex and constantly changing situation. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. Until next time.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free. And you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.